Earl Calloway spent the last 6 months of his life giving things away. He signed over the house to his eldest son. He divided the farm equipment between his two daughters. He had his savings split into 3 equal portions, notarized and filed before the first frost. By December, everything he had spent 40 years building had a name attached to it. Everything except one thing. At the far end of the conference table, on a gray Tuesday morning in January, a young man named Nathan sat with his hands folded and said nothing while the family around him divided what remained. He had arrived expecting nothing. He had been taught quietly over the course of a lifetime not to expect much at all. When the attorney closed the folder and the room began to relax, Nathan stood, shook the man's hand, and walked out. He had an envelope in his jacket pocket. Nobody had seen him put it there. The Calloway family had a particular way of telling the story of Nathan's arrival. They told it as an act of generosity. Earl and Ida Calloway had taken in their daughter's son after the accident that took both his parents, and they had raised him as one of their own. That was the version that got told at church, at family reunions, at the occasional gathering where appearances needed to be maintained. The version that didn't get told was simpler and less flattering. Nathan had arrived at 4 years old with a single suitcase and the kind of quietness that adults mistake for resilience. He had grown up in the back bedroom of a farmhouse that never quite felt like his. He had eaten at a table where the conversation moved around him, the way water moves around a stone in a creek, not deliberately, not with malice, but with the casual ease of something that had always been that way. Roland Calloway, Earl's eldest son, had been 23 when Nathan arrived. He had made his feelings known without ever making them explicit. There were no cruelties Nathan could point to, no incidents he could name. It was more like the absence of warmth, a kind of practiced indifference that communicated, year after year, that Nathan's presence in the family was tolerated rather than chosen. He had stopped expecting it to change somewhere around the age of 12. Earl was different. Not demonstrative, Earl Calloway was not a man who expressed things easily out loud, but different in the ways that counted. He taught Nathan how to work. He sat beside him at the kitchen table in the evenings, without making it a production. When Nathan graduated from the regional high school in a class of 41, Earl drove 2 hours round trip in a truck that needed a new alternator and sat in the third row and clapped. He didn't say much about it afterward. He didn't need to. When Nathan was 22, Ida died of a stroke. She went quickly, the doctors said, as though speed were a comfort. Earl went quiet in a way he had never been quiet before. Not grief exactly, or not only grief. Something more like a decision being made. Nathan moved out that year. He found work as a site manager for a regional paving contractor. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the farm. He came back on Sundays, helped with whatever needed doing, and drove home before dark. That was the rhythm of his life for the next 11 years, until Earl got sick. Earl was diagnosed with a progressive cardiac condition in the spring of the year before he died. He was 71 years old. The doctors gave him a range, 18 months on the low end, perhaps 4 years if he managed things carefully. Earl did not manage things carefully. He managed them completely. He had the will drafted within the month. Roland handled the arrangements. He had always handled the arrangements. For the past 15 years, he had managed the operational side of the family's modest holdings. The farm, a storage unit rental property, a small interest in a regional equipment dealership. Earl had trusted him with the numbers because Earl's attention had always been on the land and the work itself, not the accounts. That trust, it would turn out, had been expensive. But Nathan didn't know that yet. The will reading was held on a Tuesday morning at the office of the family's attorney, a man named Garrett Poole, who had handled the Calloway family's legal affairs for over 20 years. The conference room was beige and overlit. There were 8 people at the table: Roland, his wife Sandra, Roland's 2 adult children, Earl's 2 daughters and their husbands, and Nathan. Nathan sat at the far end. Garrett Poole read through the document in the measured, unhurried voice of a man who had done this many times. The house and the primary acreage went to Roland, as the eldest son and the one who had managed the estate. The equipment dealership interest was divided between the daughters. The savings, $87,000 less than most of them had expected, were split in 3. Roland received 40%. Each daughter received 30. Nathan received nothing. There was no dramatic moment. No one laughed. No one looked at him. The document simply moved through its provisions and reached its conclusion, and Nathan's name appeared nowhere in it. He had expected this. He had told himself on the drive over that he had expected this. He had told himself it would not land the way it landed. He sat very still while Garrett Poole gathered the papers. It landed the way it landed. He was almost to the parking lot when he felt the envelope in his jacket pocket. He had found it that morning, slipped under his apartment door sometime in the night. His name on the front in Earl's handwriting, slow and deliberate, the way Earl wrote everything. He had opened it in the kitchen before driving to the reading. He had read it once and put it in his pocket. Parcel 7, Nathan, find what I kept for you. The county recorder's office. Ask for Margaret Solis, she knows. Don't tell Roland. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and read it again. 3 sentences. He drove to the county recorder's office. The county recorder's office was a low brick building 2 blocks from the courthouse. It smelled like old paper and floor cleaner. The woman at the front desk sent him back to a corner office where a woman in her late 50s sat behind a desk covered in survey maps. Her name was Margaret Solis. She had been the senior title analyst at the Holt County Recorder's office for 22 years. She looked up when Nathan knocked on the open door. She looked at him the way someone looks at a person they've been expecting. Nathan Calloway, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said. She opened a drawer and removed a file folder. It was thick. She set it on the desk between them and folded her hands on top of it. Your grandfather came to see me 6 months ago, she said. He was very specific about what he wanted. He was also very specific about timing. He asked me to hold this until after the estate reading. She paused. He assumed you wouldn't be included. Nathan looked at the folder. He was right, he said. She slid the folder across the desk. The deed was 3 pages, dense with legal language, but the essential facts were clear. Parcel 7, 312 acres in the eastern portion of Holt County, had been purchased by Earl James Calloway in 1987 and transferred, via irrevocable trust, to Nathan James Calloway in 1994. Nathan had been 10 years old in 1994. He had been in the 4th grade. He sat with that for a moment. He's been paying taxes on this land, Margaret said, watching him read. From a private account Roland didn't have access to, every payment on time for 31 years. Nathan looked up. 31 years, he said. Yes, he looked back at the deed. 312 acres, transferred to a 10-year-old boy, maintained in secret for 31 years, taxes paid out of a private account, never mentioned. He never told me, Nathan said. Margaret Solis was quiet for a moment. He told me, she said, that the land would explain itself. Nathan drove out the following morning. The address on the deed was a rural route number that didn't appear on most maps. The survey description used landmarks, a section line, a creek crossing, a gate with a specific bearing from the county road. Nathan printed the description and drove east. The county road turned to gravel after 12 miles. The gravel thinned. He passed a rusted water tank, a collapsed equipment shed, 2 abandoned homesteads with their windows gone. The land out here was flat and dry, pale yellow grass moving in a shallow wind. Not farming country, not much of anything country. He found the gate because of the padlock. It was a standard farm gate, steel, sitting in a gap in a barbed wire fence that ran along the road's shoulder. The padlock was new. The rest of the fence was original rusted posts, old wire, but the padlock was new, and it was the only new thing in sight. Nathan reached into his pocket for the key ring. After Earl's death, Roland had handed him a ring of old keys with the offhand comment that they were probably junk, but he could take them if he wanted. Nathan had not thought about them again until this moment. The third key fit the padlock. He swung the gate open and drove through. The land beyond the fence was overgrown. Sumac and scrub pine had reclaimed most of the open ground. A broken fence line marked the eastern border, its posts leaning at angles like they were tired. The soil was pale and hard-packed, the kind of ground that gives grudgingly. There were no large trees anywhere visible except at the far northern edge, where a tree line marked what was probably a creek drainage. He drove slowly, following two faint tire tracks through the brush. The tracks led to a stone building near the center of the property. He stopped the truck and sat looking at it for a long moment. It was small, 20 feet by 12, perhaps, built from fitted limestone blocks, each one cut and placed by hand. The mortar was old but intact. The roof was metal standing seam, and it was not old. It had been replaced in the last several years. Not recently, but not decades ago either. Someone had been maintaining it. The door was solid wood framed in steel, and it had a lock. Nathan tried the fourth key on the ring. The door opened. The interior was one room. A workbench ran along the left wall, hand-built from rough lumber, its surface worn smooth from use. A wood stove sat in the right-hand corner, a metal shelf unit against the back wall. An oil lantern, clean and full. The floor was flagstone fitted tightly without mortar. It was clean, not spotless but maintained. Someone had been here not long ago. Then he saw the photograph. It was framed and hung on the back wall above the shelf unit, small enough to miss if you weren't looking. A photograph of a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in an open field. The boy was not looking at the camera. He was looking at something to his left, off frame. His hands were in his pockets. Nathan recognized the shirt. His grandmother had bought it for him at a school supply sale when he was 8. He had worn it until the sleeves were too short. He stood looking at the photograph for a while. Then he noticed the metal box on the shelf. It was a strongbox, maybe 14 inches long, fitted directly into the shelf unit and anchored to it, almost part of the structure itself. It had a combination lock. Beside it, taped to the shelf, was a small envelope. He recognized the handwriting immediately. "Open when you're ready. Take your time." Earl, he stood in the doorway for a moment. The wind moved through the scrub outside. A bird somewhere in the tree line called once and went quiet. He went inside and closed the door. The combination was his birthday, the month and day, no year. He hadn't expected to know it, and then he did. The box opened. Inside, 22 letters, each in its own envelope, each labeled with a year. The earliest was dated 1994. The most recent was dated 2 years ago, 6 months before Earl's diagnosis. A photograph of a woman holding an infant. Nathan turned it over. "She picked this for you. 1987, his grandfather's handwriting." The woman was his grandmother Ida at an age he had never known, young, clear-eyed, standing in a field of pale grass that he recognized now as the field outside this window. A folded survey map, its margins covered in handwritten notes. A sealed envelope at the bottom of the box, unmarked except for 4 words in his grandfather's hand, "Only if you need it." He set that one aside. He picked up the first letter and read. The first letter was dated October 1994. Earl would have been 43 years old. I am writing this because I don't know how to say it out loud. Your grandmother said I should try. She is usually right about these things. You don't know about this land yet. I don't know exactly when you'll find it, maybe when you're 18, maybe later. That depends on things I can't predict, but I want you to know why I kept it. When Ida first saw it, back in '87, she stood at that gate for a long time before she said anything. Then she said it felt like a place that was waiting for someone. She meant you, I think, even then. You weren't born yet. Your mother was. Maybe Ida saw something I didn't. I bought it because she asked me to. That's the truth. 312 acres for $4,200. The previous owner needed cash, and I had just enough. I put it in your name in 1994 because I wanted it to be yours before anyone thought to argue about it. I hope by the time you read this, none of this arguing will have been necessary. But I am a realist. Nathan set the letter down and picked up the next one. The letters did not follow a continuous narrative. They were dispatches, written when something moved Earl to write and not otherwise. Some were long, some were 3 lines. They covered 28 years with the irregular rhythm of a man who was more comfortable with silence than with language, but who kept returning to the page anyway. In 1997, Earl wrote about the summer Nathan broke his arm falling out of the equipment barn. He wrote, "You didn't cry. You were 9 years old and you sat on the ground and looked at your arm and said, 'I think it's broke, Grandpa.' I didn't know what to do with that kind of quiet. I still don't. But I think it will serve you well." In 2001, he wrote, "Roland asked me again about the eastern parcel. I told him the county had it flagged for a survey error. He accepted that because it's the answer that doesn't cost him anything to accept. He's not a bad man, Nathan. He is a man who learned early that the world belongs to those who take. I didn't teach him that, but I also didn't teach him otherwise. That's on me." In 2003, a single paragraph. Your grandmother would have known what to say to you right now. "I'm sorry she isn't here. I am trying." In 2008, Earl wrote longer than usual. "There are things about this family I've carried for a long time without saying. I am going to try to say some of them now, though I may not finish. Your parents' accident, I have told you what I know. The road, the ice, the other vehicle, that is all true. What I haven't told you is what came before it. In the year before the accident, your father was in a difficult situation, a business arrangement that had gone wrong. He owed money to people he should not have borrowed from, and Roland had been the one to introduce him to those people. I don't know the exact shape of what happened. I have never been able to prove the exact shape, but I know that Roland knew your father was in trouble, and I know that Roland did not help him. And I know that 6 weeks after the accident, the debt disappeared. The men your father owed, they stopped coming around. I thought about that for a long time. I am not telling you this so that you will hate Roland. I am telling you because you deserve to know why I kept this land the way I kept it. I needed one thing that was yours that no one could reach. I needed it to exist before anyone had reason to argue about it. That's what Parcel 7 is. It is the thing I could protect." Nathan read that paragraph 3 times. Outside, the wind had picked up. The light through the one small window of the stone building had shifted, late afternoon, slanting and yellow. He had been here for hours without realizing it. He picked up letter 19. "The year was 2014. I saw you at the county fair last month. You didn't see me. You were with a woman I didn't recognize, and you were laughing at something she said, and you looked, I don't have a better word for this, free. Like a person who has stopped waiting for something to go wrong. I almost came over. I didn't because I didn't know what to say. I have never known what to say to you. I hope someday that changes. I hope when you find these letters, you understand why I said things the way I did, in letters, in the dark, to a box in a stone building on land you didn't know you owned. I loved you the same way Ida did. I just inherited her gift for saying it out loud when she died, instead of before. The last letter was dated 14 months ago. Earl had known, by then, exactly what his body was doing. I don't have much time left to be careful about what I write, so I'm going to stop being careful. You were never the orphan they treated you as. You were the one Ida and I chose. We chose you before the accident and after it and every year in between. The house, the equipment, the savings. I let Roland take those because those are the things Roland understands. The things that can be counted and spent and leveraged. This land, this is the thing Roland doesn't understand. He never will. He looks at it and sees scrub brush and hard soil and a county road that goes nowhere. He sees worthless. Ida saw something waiting. So did I. Don't sell it, Nathan. Not right away. Give it a chance to explain itself first. It has a habit of surprising people. Nathan folded the last letter. He sat on the floor of the stone building his grandfather had built by hand, and he held 22 envelopes in his lap, and he was very still for a long time. Then he reached for the sealed envelope, only if you need it. He set it down again. He was not ready for that one yet. He had options. He had a legal deed to 312 acres. He had a title analyst who had known about the land for 6 months and was prepared to assist him. He had a modest amount in savings, $12,000, enough to make a down payment on something, enough to walk away from Holt County entirely and begin something clean somewhere else. He thought about that drive for a long time. He thought about Roland sitting in Earl's house, the house that now had Roland's name on the deed, sleeping in a room that smelled like Earl's cedar closet, and moving through rooms that Ida had cleaned and organized for 40 years. He thought about the way Roland had handed him the key ring, probably junk, take it if you want. The casual certainty of a man who had accounted for everything. He had not accounted for Parcel 7. He had not accounted for Margaret Solis. He had not accounted for a strongbox built into the wall of a stone building on land he'd been told didn't exist. Nathan looked at the sealed envelope on the floor in front of him. Only if you need it. He picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket. Same jacket. Same pocket as the note from the morning of the will reading. He locked the stone building. He drove back to the county road. He didn't go toward his apartment. He turned east, toward the tree line at the far edge of the property, and he drove along the fence line until the gravel ran out. He stopped and looked at the land. 312 acres of scrub pine and pale grass and hard soil, and whatever was underneath it. Ida had stood at this gate and said it felt like a place that was waiting for someone. He decided she had been right. What Nathan didn't know yet was that Roland had known about Parcel 7 for years. Not everything. Not the deed, not the trust, not the strongbox. But he had known the land existed. He had suspected it was being maintained. And the moment Nathan walked into Margaret Solis' office and asked for a filed deed, that conversation had reached Roland within 48 hours. Roland had already started making calls. The sealed envelope, the one labeled only if you need it, was about to become the most consequential piece of paper Nathan had ever held. But he wasn't going to open it for another 3 weeks. And when he did, what was inside it was going to rewrite everything he thought he knew about his family. If this story has reached something in you, if you've ever been the person in the room that nobody counted, I want to hear about it. Leave your story in the comments. That's why this channel exists. Subscribe so you're here when we continue. This is far from over. Roland's first move was legal. 16 days after the estate reading, Nathan received a certified letter from a Holt County law firm informing him that the Callaway estate was formally contesting the validity of the 1994 trust transfer. The claim was that Earl Callaway had been suffering from cognitive decline at the time of the transfer and lacked the capacity to make legally binding decisions. Earl had been 43 years old in 1994. He had been a licensed heavy equipment operator, a property owner in good standing, and had filed his own taxes without assistance for 30 years. There was no medical record, no physician's assessment, no affidavit from anyone who had known him at the time that suggested diminished capacity. It was a thin argument. It was also an expensive one to fight. Nathan called Margaret Solis. "He's hoping you don't have the money for a prolonged legal battle," she said. "Most people in your position don't." "I don't," Nathan said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "But a thin claim made in bad faith sometimes collapses faster than a strong one. I've seen it before. The question is whether Roland has something he's protecting." That question had an answer. Nathan just didn't have it yet. The second move was personal. Roland called Nathan on a Sunday afternoon. His voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of a man who wanted to be seen as reasonable. "I'm not looking for a fight," Roland said. "I don't think you want one either. You've got a deed to some land that's been sitting unused for 30 years. I can make that a clean transaction for both of us. 180 cash. You sign it over, we close this out, no attorneys, no courts." Nathan said nothing for a moment. "Earl left it to me," he said. Earl was an old man who didn't understand the complications he was creating. Nathan looked at the wall. "Then you've got nothing to worry about," he said. There was a pause on the line. "Nathan, I'll let my attorney respond to the filing," Nathan said. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a while afterward. He was not angry exactly, or not only angry. There was something else underneath it, something that felt more like clarity, the shape of things becoming visible. He reached for the sealed envelope, "Only if you need it." He opened it. Inside the envelope was a letter from Earl, dated 3 years ago, and attached to it, clipped together, folded once, 15 years of financial records. Earl's letter was 3 paragraphs long. "I have been sitting on this for a long time. I told myself I was keeping it because I hoped it would never be necessary. That may be true. But I also kept it because I was afraid of what using it would do to what remained of this family. I am giving it to you now so that you can make that call. It was never mine to make. What you are holding is documentation assembled by Bernard Holt, who was the family business accountant from 1991 to 2018. Bernard is retired now. He lives outside the county. He prepared an affidavit in 2019 and gave it to me with his blessing to use it however I saw fit. I saw fit to give it to you." Nathan set the letter down and unfolded the financial records. He was not an accountant. He was a site manager for a paving contractor. But the pattern in these documents did not require specialized training to understand. Beginning in 2003, a series of transfers had moved money from the Callaway family business, a small agricultural equipment rental operation, into a personal LLC registered to Roland Callaway. The transfers were small at first, $800, $1,200, categorized as maintenance expenses, consulting fees, administrative costs. Over time, they grew. The affidavit from Bernard Holt was 12 pages. It documented each transaction with specificity, dates, amounts, account numbers, and categorizations. It documented the total across 15 years. The number at the bottom of the final page was $341,200. Bernard Holt had been watching it happen for years. He had raised the matter with Earl privately in 2017. Earl had asked him to document everything and say nothing. Bernard had done exactly that. Nathan read the affidavit twice. He thought about the estate, the house, the equipment, the savings. $87,000 in savings, split into 3 portions. He thought about the equipment dealership interest, sold off years ago for what Roland had described as a fair market price. He thought about 40 years of his grandfather's work, compressed down to a number that hadn't seemed right to anyone at the reading, but that nobody had been willing to question out loud. $341,200. He thought about a debt that disappeared 6 weeks after an accident in the winter, and about a man who had known about it and had spent 30 years paying taxes on a secret. He called Margaret Solis. "I need an attorney," he said, "a real one." Margaret referred him to a property law firm in the county seat. Nathan drove there the following morning with the deed, the affidavit, and the financial records in a manila envelope under his arm. He was there for 2 hours. When he left, the attorney, a woman named Claire Ewan who had practiced property law in Holt County for 19 years, had made 2 phone calls. The first was to the state attorney general's office. The second was to Rowland's attorneys, not officially, not as a filing, but as a private communication. "We have documentation that may be relevant to how this contest proceeds. We thought you should be aware of it before we determine next steps." Nathan did not go back to his apartment that night. He drove to Parcel 7 and sat in the stone building until it was dark. 10 days later, Rowland's attorneys filed a 1-line withdrawal of the estate contest. No statement, no explanation, no call from Rowland. Claire Ewan forwarded the withdrawal by email with a single line of commentary, "As expected." Nathan read the email in his truck in the parking lot of the paving company where he had worked for 9 years. He sat with it for a while. He did not celebrate. He thought about the last letter in the strongbox, about his grandfather writing about Ida standing at the gate. He thought about the word Earl had used, afraid. Earl Calloway had spent 30 years being afraid, afraid of what the truth would do, afraid of breaking what remained of a family that had already broken, afraid of a confrontation he could never quite bring himself to start. He had expressed that fear the way he expressed everything. Indirectly, quietly, in letters he never sent, in a building he never mentioned, on land he maintained in secret for 3 decades. He had never gotten his moment. Nathan had used it for him, not as revenge, as a shield exactly the way Earl had intended. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, the county assessor, reviewing the Parcel 7 survey as part of the probate closure, flagged something in the eastern section of the property. A geological note in the county's historical records, logged in 1981 and never followed up on, indicated the presence of a significant limestone aquifer beneath the eastern third of the land. Not oil, not gas, water. In a region where agricultural water rights were increasingly contested and increasingly valuable. The eastern portion of 312 acres sat directly above one of the largest undeveloped aquifer access points in the county. Earl had bought the land for $4,200 because the previous owner needed cash. He had held it for 31 years because Ida said it was waiting for someone. He had been right about the wrong thing. 3 agricultural land trusts contacted Nathan within 30 days of the deed being publicly confirmed. He did not return any of the calls immediately. He drove to the property first, stood at the gate and looked at the pale grass and the scrub pine and the tree line at the far edge. He was in no hurry. He did not sell, not the land, not the aquifer access, not the stone building. He spent the first spring on the property working alone. He cleared the primary field by hand and with a rented brush cutter. He repaired the fence line on the eastern border, replacing posts and restringing wire the way Earl had taught him when he was 14. He was not fast at it. He made mistakes. He drove back to the hardware store twice in a single afternoon. He kept going. In the fall, he hired 2 local contractors to begin work on a second structure, a proper workshop, framed in timber, set 50 yards east of the stone building. One of the contractors was a man his own age who came with good references and a steady way of working. The other was a 22-year-old named Devin, who had aged out of the county's foster care system the previous year and was picking up construction work wherever he could find it. Nathan had been asked once by one of the land trust representatives what his plans for the property were. The man had meant the question financially. Nathan had answered it differently. "I'm figuring that out," he said, "but some of it is going to be for people who need a place to learn something." He wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet, but he had started. He named the property the Ida Calloway Land Trust, named for the woman who had stood at a rusted gate in 1987 and told her husband the land felt like it was waiting for someone. She had been right. It had been waiting for Nathan. It had just taken 31 years to be ready for him to arrive. Earl Calloway gave everything away before he died. The house went to his eldest son. The equipment went to his daughters. The savings went to the family he'd spent his life providing for. And then quietly, without ceremony, without witness, he gave 312 acres of scrub grass and hard soil, and a limestone aquifer, and a stone building, and 22 letters, and 31 years of tax payments to the boy who had come to him at 4 years old with a single suitcase, and a kind of quiet that adults mistake for resilience. Not because Nathan had earned it in some transactional sense, not because he had performed the role of the grateful ward with sufficient consistency, but because in 1987, Ida Calloway had stood at a gate on the eastern edge of Holt County and seen a place that was waiting for someone, and Earl had trusted her. He had spent the rest of his life trusting her. He gave away everything, except for the thing that mattered most. If this story reached something in you, if you have ever sat at the far end of a table and expected nothing and felt what that costs, I want to hear from you. That is what this channel is built for. Stories like this one, the land, the bloodlines, the things that get buried and the people who find them. Leave your story in the comments. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. We're just getting started.